Hello, and welcome to Mission Report with Chris Dosh. Today, I have the wonderful pleasure of introducing you to 𝐒𝐡𝐚𝐫 𝐾oy. Sydney and I and my team have been working together for about 3 years now. Megan Ingram, one of her ambassadors for Shared Hope, came down to our office, and she met with Doug Langenfelder from my team. We got it led to a series of events that gave us an event down at University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown that was pretty well attended, and we're coming off of another meeting up in Bradford, which she partnered up with Zonta International, where we had a number of law enforcement agencies, a prosecutor, as well as the local Child Advocacy Center, Sane Nurse, and a bunch of others there to let the people know who were coming and interested in anti-human trafficking efforts themselves, as well as looking for what they could do to partner. But Sydney has been our go-to person when it comes to legislation, and she helped us navigate a lot of waters to work with other anti-human trafficking organizations to come up with some good pieces of legislation here over the last 2 years that we've managed to get signed into law. And she works with other states, and I just want to welcome other state legislators, and she's also the point person for the state report cards for how our states are performing. We've gone from an F up to a D. We're working our way up, and Sydney's a big part of that effort. Sydney, welcome. I'd like you to introduce yourself a little bit, how you got involved with the anti-human trafficking efforts, and let's start with that so people have a sense of who you are.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you again. We just saw each other a few weeks ago. You were down in DC on a roundtable that we had at the Hill, so it's good to see you again. My name is 𝐒𝐡𝐚𝐫 𝐾oy. I'm the Director of Advocacy at Shared Hope International, where, as you said, I kind of am the primary point of contact for anything related to technical assistance on policy and legislation. So I work with lawmakers and other advocates to try to pass laws that will provide kind of a better response to the issue of child and youth sex trafficking. So I guess a bit about my background. So I am an attorney by trade, and believe it or not, I was one of those crazy kids who kind of knew what they wanted to do at a pretty young age. So when I was 17, I was a senior in high school. And the school district that I attended had a requirement that you had to write a research paper before graduating, and I wrote my research paper on the use of personal ad websites like Backpage when it used to exist and Craigslist in the facilitation of domestic minor sex trafficking. Just thinking back at it, as a 17-year-old, like what a heavy topic to be researching. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that once you learn about it, it's hard not to want to be involved. And so I kind of decided right then and there that I wanted to be involved in the anti-trafficking movement in some capacity. And, I figured that law was kind of the best way for me personally to kind of, I guess, try to address some of the issues. So I went to law school, and my first couple jobs out of school, I was actually an attorney, so I was providing legal services to survivors of sex trafficking. So I did a lot of family law, civil protective orders, and post-conviction relief work, but kind of just like working within the court system and seeing all of the obstacles that my clients would have to kind of jump through to try to seek justice. I decided that I had kind of a bigger interest in trying to change kind of the system at large. so that survivors, when they were interacting with systems, they were interacting in a much like more fair way. So that kind of led me to the policy side of things and led me to Shared Hope. So I've been with Shared Hope since April of 2022, so about 3 years, about the same amount of time that myself and your office have been working together. So yeah, it's been a really wonderful relationship that I feel like we've developed in the past few years, and we've gotten some great work done in Pennsylvania, and I'm looking forward to continuing that work.
Well, I know I'm blessed with a great team, and Linda also understands that you are a blessing to her organization. So, you know, when you talked about the obstacles that were your clients faced, one of the things that we're starting to work on here in Pennsylvania is a vacatur legislation. Do you want to explain a little bit about what your clients experienced with having a criminal record and trying to get employment or whatever? But can you explain the importance of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, as you said, vacatur, which is kind of a silly word, but it's a form of post-conviction relief, is really, really critical to victims of human trafficking. And it's an issue that's really near and dear to my heart, because when I was practicing, a big portion of the work that I was doing was getting vacatur petitions for my clients so that they could get those records vacated and expunged. But for those who are probably unfamiliar with what it is essentially a form of post-conviction relief that vacates a conviction and then expunges a record. And so this is really important for survivors because, you know, unfortunately, part of their victimization oftentimes involves the commission of certain criminal offenses, right? So I think the most obvious one that comes to mind is if you're a victim of sex trafficking, you are forced to sell sex commercially. So many trafficking survivors have prostitution-related offenses on their criminal record. But what I think maybe some people wouldn't know is that oftentimes there are other charges that survivors will have on their criminal record. So if a survivor has to meet a quota at the end of the night and they aren't able to or don't want to sell their body to meet that quota, what oftentimes they will do is they will steal, you know, money or personal property from buyers that they're meeting for dates. Or, you know, I had a client who part of her trafficking was, and this was, you know, not just like in an attempt to meet a quota, but was an expectation of her pimp was to go to places like Target, for example, and steal merchandise from Target and then would pawn that off. They had like a relationship with somebody who owned a pawn shop. So they'd pawn that off for money, and then that money would go back to the trafficker. So sometimes, you know, survivors would have like larceny records, and depending on the level, you know, in the state, like the dollar amount, sometimes that could be a grand larceny charge, which would be a felony offense. And, you know, in some states, like back when I first started working in Virginia, that threshold was only $200. So if you stole anything over $200, you automatically got a felony offense. And then it was like a 3 strikes rule too. So if you had 2 misdemeanor larceny charges, and then your third would be a felony, regardless of the amount of money. So, you know, we have things like larceny, obviously drug possession. You know, many survivors are using drugs to cope with their victimization, or oftentimes traffickers will use drugs as a means of controlling their victims. And so oftentimes we see survivors with possession charges, sometimes even with possession with intent to distribute, because that's part of kind of their trafficking scheme. And then in other cases, you know, we see them unfortunately charged with even more serious offenses. Like, you know, we've seen some really kind of high profile, very unfortunate cases of young girls who were minors when they were victimized and used force to fight back against either their trafficker or the person who had purchased them for sex. And so you see them charged sometimes with manslaughter, sometimes with murder, or even just like an assault charge, right? Because they're trying to defend themselves from their exploiters. So, recognizing kind of the trauma and the power and control dynamics that exist within a trafficking situation, vacatur, this form of post-conviction relief, is really us recognizing, okay, you actually committed this offense as a direct result of your trafficking victimization, and you didn't have the requisite criminal intent or mens rea to actually be found guilty of this crime in the first place. But because we, didn't know you were a victim, or because, we didn't really understand it whenever you were convicted, we didn't recognize that. And so this is our ability to kind of right that wrong and say, oh my gosh, like you shouldn't have been convicted of this crime in the first place. We will vacate that conviction, really return you to the status of innocent, and also expunge or destroy any sort of like criminal record, arrest record, anything like that, to ensure that survivors who have, exited the life and are trying to move on and build like a self-sufficient life are able to do that without barriers to accessing things like meaningful employment and safe housing, which is also a huge way of preventing that re-victimization, because whenever survivors don't have the ability to make their own money or have safe housing and provide for themselves or their families, it's a really easy thing for them to slip back into kind of a trafficking situation, because if their trafficker is able to meet those needs that they're not able to meet on their own, then it just, people have to do what they have to do to survive. So, yeah.
Yeah, when being former law enforcement, some people would think that I would be totally against this whole concept. But when you talk to the survivors and you learn that they really aren't acting with the kind of forethought and the kind of mental capacity that one deals with, even as a teenager, some of these kids get drawn in, some of them are 12, 13, 14, well, even younger, but they don't know what's going on. And an interesting statistic I heard recently is that their point of arrest development basically is arrested at the time they enter into this. Their mental faculties are arrested at that point. And we know that now that nobody enters into this life willingly. There's coercion, there's manipulation and that kind of thing. Can you touch on a little bit about what you've seen and what Shared Hope's discovered as far as that trauma bond and the ability of a trafficker to manipulate? And even if you go to some of the familial trafficking, right up through to the people who grab them through the internet and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at a trafficker, I mean, they really are a case study in master manipulation. They're really smart and savvy at being able to identify people who are vulnerable. And oftentimes that vulnerability, I mean, it can look different for different people, right? But we oftentimes see traffickers targeting young people, specifically minors who are in the foster care system, who don't have the best home life, who don't have a stable home life, who are maybe experiencing abuse, sometimes sexual abuse at the hands of their family members, and who, because of that abuse, have left home, they've run away, and find themselves, either in the foster care system or kind of on the streets. And they recognize that, and they try to, groom them by meeting those basic needs. And sometimes that basic need is just love, like wanting to feel loved. Sometimes it's not, the housing and the food, which of course, oftentimes those are also, mechanisms that traffickers exploit. But a lot of times these young people have just never felt what it means to truly be loved by the very people in their lives who are supposed to love them and protect them. And, tragically, as you said, sometimes even the family members are the people who are exploiting them. Whether that's because that mother or father, for example, was exploited themselves when they were younger, and it's just a cycle that's been repeated, or maybe there's an issue with addiction. I know a lot of survivors who, unfortunately, their parents would sell them because they had a fix that they needed, to get, because they had substance abuse issues. And traffickers are, again, they are master manipulators. They're really smart at being able to identify the folks who are in kind of that most vulnerable position. And then there's that period of grooming where they act like they are, the nicest person this victim has ever seen, and making sure that their basic needs are met, that they're expressing like love and affection for them. And then, it gets to a point where we call it, they turn them out. So it's, I've done all of these things for you. If you love me, you'll do this for me. And, unfortunately from there, oftentimes it escalates to very severe violence or threats of violence against the victim or the victim's loved ones. And so in terms of like the power and control that exists in that trauma bond, when this person is demonstrating that they are the only person who has ever loved that individual, and you and I can recognize that that's not love, but these people
Right.
who've never experienced it, they don't know what like a healthy love looks like or a healthy relationship looks like. So they think that they have to do these things in order to keep that love and affection, or the whatever basic need their trafficker is providing for them. And then again, there's that power aspect and the control aspect as well. So not only is it like the trauma that has connected them, but it's also the trafficker using the power and control tactics over the individual to kind of get them to do whatever their trafficker wants them to do, including, sometimes commit crimes.
Yes. One of the things that happened when we had an event up in Bradford, and by the way, I want to thank you for Megan Ingram. She was partners with us along with Zonta International up at Bradford and McKean County, along with a bunch of others. We had 4 law enforcement agencies up there, the prosecutor for the McKean County. But as we were giving our presentation, we had 3 teenage girls that were a part of it. And as some of the things that we were discussing were being expressed, you see the recognition that this is actually going on. And this particularly with the internet grooming kind of thing that's going on. Talked to all 3 of them shortly after, and that they were going to be talking to the kids that they knew that were involved in this and trying to get them to the same nurse or the child advocacy center up there. But what's interesting is that they're part of a small organization that for young girls that Christian based, and all 3 of them, one of them wasn't allowed to have a cell phone yet. Another one was it was a flip phone, and the other one, she said, now I know why my parents, she had an internet type phone, but she said, now I know why my parents won't let me take the phone upstairs when I go to bed at night. Can you talk about some of the grooming techniques that you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny that you bring up the phone thing, because I actually, back when I was practicing, I had a client who that is actually how their trafficker lured them into a trafficking situation, is by buying her a phone. her parents wouldn't buy her a phone and her trafficker would. So, which is, when we talk about what it means to be trafficked, right? We talk about the Commercial Sex Act for anything of value, because sometimes it's not money, sometimes
Yes.
it's a cell phone, right? Or sometimes it's food, or sometimes it's a place to stay. But yeah, so a lot of traffickers, being that it's 2025 and so much of our life has moved online. I mean, you and I are sitting down having this conversation over, Zoom in front of our computers. And traffickers are keeping up with the Joneses in that sense, as they recognize that everybody is online, particularly young people are online. And so, social media, we have seen, been used as an opportunity for traffickers to, unfortunately target young people through things like Instagram and TikTok. And now it's even, I heard this week that is even happening on Roblox, which I didn't know what that was because I am a woman of a certain age, but it's like a gaming app essentially for children to use to like play games. And I guess there's a social aspect of it. And so yeah, it's happening through like gaming, and it's happening through Discord, which I think is another gaming kind of format, right?
Well, we've had actually a story of a 12-year-old sitting right next to his father on two separate computers. I think it was Roblox they were playing.
Yeah.
And the father was totally unaware that the young boy was in a private chat.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the mother came through the door behind and saw the private chat going on that they became aware of this groomer that was trying to lure the kid in.
100%. And so basically, if there's any means of socialization, if there's any kind of chat, right? I mean, like, back in my day when the internet was somewhat of a new thing, like we had chat rooms, right? Like, there were these random things that you could just like join through AOL or whatever. But now technology has become so sophisticated that even, social networking sites or gaming sites have all of these like social features to them where random people can basically spark up a conversation with anybody. And they use that as an opportunity to lure and groom young people. It could be a young girl who's, 14 years old, and someone messaged them on Instagram and calls them beautiful, and it's the first time they've ever received that kind of attention from somebody. And so naturally, as like a young person who wants to feel attention and who wants to experience maybe what it's like to be in love one day, why wouldn't I spark up a conversation with this person who's giving me compliments? And especially if they're offering me things like a cell phone, or taking them to get their toes and nails done at the spa, right? So the grooming process, I mean, it can happen over a long period of time, or it can happen pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean, we are seeing more and more that traffickers are using online platforms to groom and lure children specifically into this
AI,
life.
the AI is patrolling or looking at all these social profiles, and there are key words that the groomers are looking for as a means of exploiting women and men. They want to fill that need so that their target ends up becoming dependent upon them. And a young girl, she can't get the latest phone, and she's complaining because her parents won't keep up with the Joneses. And then this guy is like, "Hey, he comes
I
on.
can buy you that iPhone 16." Yeah.
And he on his online profile initially, at least, is he's she's 14, she's 16, or he's 16, and
Right.
but I've got access to this for you, and then yeah, they're experts at fulfilling a need. You're we've gone a little bit away from your expertise in helping has been just remarkable, and I do want to get to some of the future legislation that we're looking at. The safe harbor legislation. You want to go into some of that and what you see as effective?
Yeah. So safe harbor is kind of a term of art that we use in the anti-trafficking field to basically talk about ensuring that minors aren't being prosecuted for, at the base level, prostitution-related offenses, because there's no such thing as a child prostitute. Children, anybody under the age of 18 can absolutely not consent to commercial sex. So I think our number one priority at Shared Hope has really been trying to ensure that every state has a law that provides immunity for minors, so people under the age of 18, from being arrested, detained, and prosecuted for prostitution-related offenses. But we also, our hope is that we can expand that to some of the other offenses that we oftentimes are seeing young people charged with related to their victimization. So, Pennsylvania is one of the states that currently has a safe harbor law. So that means that nobody under the age of 18 in Pennsylvania can be arrested and prosecuted for prostitution-related offenses. But we have been working, and it's my understanding that Senator Laughlin is the sponsor of this bill, but we have been working on expanding safe harbor in Pennsylvania. So under this bill, any minor who is engaging in any sort of nonviolent offense would be eligible for a safe harbor response, meaning that instead of being brought into the juvenile justice system, they would be directed to community-based services instead. Because, and this is like the real crux of it, is we want people to understand, specifically criminal justice stakeholders, that these individuals are not committing crimes because they want to, or because they have any, autonomy or role in the act itself. They're doing so because they're being forced to do so. And if they don't commit this crime, then bad things could happen to them. I mean, to be very blunt. And
Yes.
So what we want to do instead of treating them like a criminal is making sure that their needs are being met. Because if we can kind of interrupt that trauma bond between a trafficker and the victim, because the trafficker is usually the person who's, meeting that need.
Yes.
If we can instead meet that need through something like a community-based service, so like a nonprofit organization, making sure that this young person has access to mental health services, to, if there's substance abuse involved, making sure they have access to treatment for that, to housing, to, whatever these needs are that the trafficker is fulfilling, we want to make sure that that need is being met, or those needs are being met through the community, so that the young person can kind of break free of that trauma bond and ultimately exit their trafficking situation, and to do so without getting any sort of juvenile or criminal record, which we know is such a barrier to them being able to ultimately live, a whole, fulfilling, self-sufficient life. We want to make sure that these young people can ultimately, ideally break free from that life prior to the age of 25, when we know it's much harder to kind of disrupt.
Well, and that it's a criminal record's following the person for life normally, and if you weren't really responsible for what led to those criminal offenses, and you want to get a professional license, for example, you can't get a professional license with felony conviction on your record. in a lot of professions. And those are the kinds of things that the criminal justice system and the legislatures from around the country need to recognize that. And that kind of also ties into the affirmative defense piece of legislation that we're working on. You want to expand on how that's been applied in other states? Or
Yeah, absolutely. And so the affirmative defense is really an opportunity for survivors to not get those criminal records in the first place, right? So if a survivor is arrested for conduct that they had to commit as a result of their victimization, an affirmative defense essentially allows them to tell the court, yes, I did commit this offense, but I committed it because it's a direct result of my trafficking victimization. And so then a judge or a jury can determine whether or not that person should ultimately be convicted of that crime. So it allows the survivor the opportunity to kind of avoid that conviction in the first place. I think the ideal response, right, is to avoid them being criminalized at all, which is why we love Safe Harbor. We want to prevent them going into these systems altogether. But because we know that the system, unfortunately, is fallible and we don't always recognize survivors as survivors beforehand, this is at least an opportunity for them to avoid that criminal record from happening through raising that affirmative defense. So there have been a number of states who have passed this type of legislation, and it kind of varies the range of offenses that it's eligible for. We have states who, are very limited in the range of offenses. So affirmative defense is only available for prostitution-related offenses. And then we have states where it swings totally on the other side, where affirmative defense is available for any offense, even, violent offenses like murder. And then, we have some states that kind of are in the middle somewhere where you can maybe raise it in, all misdemeanor and non-violent felony cases, or some maybe enumerated list of offenses. But it's really, really critical to ensuring that survivors aren't, again, stacked with these criminal records that then prevent them from being able to move on in their life after they are able to get out of their trafficking situation. And I will just say one thing. I think that it's easy to understand the kind of like the tangible impacts of a criminal record, right? So the barrier to employment and housing and professional licenses, sometimes even like student loans. But I think one thing that we often neglect to talk about is just the emotional burden that a criminal conviction can have on a survivor, right? I mean, we talk about this person who literally all of their autonomy was stripped from them. They had no power over their lives. They were forced to commit these crimes, and now they have a criminal record that prevents them from, yes, all of the things I just named, but it's also the emotional toll of being labeled a criminal when you didn't have a choice in whether or not you committed that crime. Yeah. Or every time you apply to something, you have to answer yes on whether or not you've ever been convicted of a crime and explain that. Or, like I had clients who had prostitution charges on their record, and when they would apply for housing, they would have to explain why they had prostitution charges on their record, and just like the shame and the guilt that comes with having to kind of relive and re-traumatize themselves by explaining their circumstances. But also I've had clients who weren't able to be chaperones on their their children's school field trips.
Yeah. Because
of the things that they were forced to do years ago. I mean, I'm talking like 20 years ago. And because these records live on forever, I mean, they can't ever get rid of like the emotional toll of it. And so when we're talking about post-conviction relief and we're talking about preventing unjust criminalization, I think that we, of course, need to recognize the barriers that those things cause. for survivors, but also just the emotional toll that it has on somebody who had no choice in the matter to be labeled as a criminal and have to kind of explain away that every single time they apply for anything.
You know, as you were talking, it just came to mind that, as you said, they've never had any control over their lives as they've been going on. And for them to finally, they've got this criminal record hanging over their heads, and it seems like the whole government is set against them.
Yeah.
To have the ability to have that record expunged or whatever, that it will definitely give them a sense of power and control over their lives again in a way that they've never felt it.
Right. And there's also a relief of, okay, the state has labeled me a criminal, and they're almost like apologizing to me to say, like, we got this wrong and we're sorry, and because of that your records are vacated. And I think, you know, when we were at the ATIP meeting a few weeks ago, and we were talking about post-conviction relief at the federal level, which is one of Shared Hope's priorities at the moment, there was a conversation about pardon, right? And like whether or not survivors who maybe don't have the opportunity to have their offenses vacated or expunged, like, is there an opportunity for them to seek pardon? And there was a survivor who spoke at that hearing, and she was like, with all due respect, like, we should not have to ask for forgiveness for our victimization.
Yes.
Right? Like, they did not want to commit those crimes. And so a pardon is seeking forgiveness. That's you saying, like, yes, I committed this crime, please forgive me. And that's not what we want to do. We want to say, I didn't commit this crime. I didn't have the requisite criminal intent to be convicted of this crime. So therefore, vacate the conviction and expunge the records. So when we look at options like pardons, could they potentially have like I wouldn't say the same or equal effect as something like a vacatur or expungement, but like in theory, could potentially help a person get certain licensing or employment or whatever. But you're asking a survivor to basically ask for forgiveness for something that they had no control over in the first place. So it's just not the appropriate form of relief.
No, that one woman who, her initial arrest was an IRS basically arrest.
Yeah.
I think it was $150,000 she ended up owing the IRS, and it was because
she had no control over money.
Right, and the money wasn't hers; it was the guy who was controlling her as part of a trafficking operation. He just had stuff in her name, and she didn't have control over that money. She didn't have control over the assets or how they got the assets. And the IRS was looking for $150,000 out of her, or was it 1.5 million, something like that. It was a huge amount.
It's a lot of money.
And the one fortunate thing there was that one officer came to understand what was going on and helped her to at least get the guy arrested who was trafficking her. But that's still, and I don't think she ended up having to pay it. They ended up getting that off of her. I don't know if they gave her an basically a forgiveness on the tax loan, and she got the pardon, but that's still, it's on her record.
Still on her record, yeah.
And when somebody looks at the amount of money that was involved, if she was wanting to work for a financial institution or something like that, there is no way they were going to hire her.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are some employers that do credit checks.
Yeah.
And I mean, thankfully, the federal government a couple of years ago, they passed the Debt Bondage Repair Act, which allows victims of human trafficking to dispute like negative credit reports because of their victimization. So, you know, that is an opportunity for survivors to dispute those from credit reporting agencies, but that doesn't get rid of the debt.
Right.
So there's a lot of legal needs that survivors have that I think we don't think about as a society, because when we think about human trafficking, well, I very much think that as a whole, we don't understand what trafficking actually looks like in this country. And unfortunately, our media doesn't do a great job of representing what it actually looks like. But we could spend a whole other podcast talking about that.
We could spend a couple days talking about it,
yeah.
to be honest with you.
But I think, we think of human trafficking as a crime, and it is a crime. There is an issue of public safety that we have to be concerned about, but there's also this entire issue of how do we make a survivor whole again when for years of their life they have had no control over anything. They have had no control over their money. They had people getting, racking up debts in their name, not being able to pay their taxes because they don't have control over the money. They have a criminal record potentially, oftentimes, which was the case for my clients, ones that I was representing. Many of them have children in common with their traffickers. There's also like custody and family law concerns that you have to be considering. Many of them are married to their traffickers, so things like divorce, annulment. I mean, there's so many legal needs that survivors have. Like if they're undocumented, legal status, right? So there's just so many different things that we have to consider about how we make survivors whole when they're able to leave that life. So I would just really urge the people who are listening to this podcast to not only think of the public safety concern of like, we want to make sure that we're going after the trafficker and holding them accountable, and the buyers as well. But we also need to think like there is a person at the end of this who was a victim, who has a whole entire life to rebuild, and they need support to rebuild that life. And oftentimes a ton of legal support, not just, kind of the social services piece of it.
Getting back to the legislative thing, purpose of this, where what you've described is a situation where getting any piece of legislation through is a tedious task. And I commend you for all you're doing, because in all these different states, and you give us an hour a week with my team to be able to discuss where we're going and what we're doing. I'm very grateful, but we've only touched on the tip of the iceberg of all the things that have to be considered in the law when dealing with the victims. Can you describe, because you're doing this in all the different states, can you describe some of the biggest hurdles to getting these types of legislation done?
Yeah, I mean, obviously doing any type of work in like the legislative world is difficult work. I will say that I think I am very lucky insofar as I think human trafficking might just be the last nonpartisan issue we have left as a nation. I work in many states on both sides of the aisle. I have strong patrons on the left and on the right in pretty much every state who cares deeply about this issue. Now, they might have different ideas on how to fix the issue or how to, respond to the issue. But at the end of the day, I can honestly say that like everybody wants to help with this issue. They recognize it as an issue and they want to do something about it. I think the most difficult part of getting things passed is when I kind of touched on it just now when I was talking about how this is like a criminal justice issue, but it's also an issue in so many other ways, because this issue really hits on so many different disciplines, right? Like you have law enforcement, you have prosecutors, you have judges, you have obviously defense counsel, you have all of the nonprofit organizations who are providing the services. You have the survivors themselves, right? So there are so many different cooks in the kitchen, if you want to use that analogy, that sometimes it can be really hard to get all of those cooks on the same page about how we're gonna make dinner.
Well, I'm gonna interject just for a moment here because I want you to continue on the thought line, but I also want to commend Shared Hope because, I mean, internationally, you've got organizations that you can pull together for the Just Conference and other situations. You guys have built that level of trust. Congresswoman Smith, Linda Smith, her reputation in this area has definitely led to this, and I commend her for her leadership. But what I just want to get at is you are a tremendous resource, not just to the legislatures, you're a tremendous resource to the other organizations to start bringing them on board and having the discussions at conferences and the like, to where you're hearing a number, it's almost kind of like legislative hearings sort of thing, in that you're hearing both sides, but everybody's on board with, they want to fix the solution, or they want to find the solution.
Right.
And different sides kind of hammer it out there. And it's one of the things I love about your organization and the way that you handle these things.
Yeah, thank you. And that's really what my hope is to do, is to kind of like build the table and have people come. But yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest obstacle is really, you have so many different people who they all have a different job to do, right? Like the job of law enforcement is very different than the job of the nonprofit organization who wants to make sure that the survivor has the wraparound services that they need. And so I don't want to say that oftentimes those goals are incompatible, because I don't think that they are, but I do think that they require a conversation to ensure that everybody is getting what they need out of something, if that makes sense. So yeah, and I think that that's really what my role is as director of advocacy, is to bring all of those folks together, to have those conversations, to come up with a bill that will hopefully be the solution, or at least a better option than what's currently happening, right? And get that passed. And so while it is definitely an obstacle, you know, I've had really good success in certain states where there's a very clear buy-in from leadership, whether that is from, you know, a lawmaker's office like yourself, or whether that's from like the Attorney General's office. You know, I worked in Virginia this past summer. We put together a working group that was led by, you know, a local coalition in collaboration with the Attorney General's office and the Prosecutors Association in Virginia to expand their Vacatur bill. So if we can get buy-in from folks and we can get them in the same room, we can come up with legislative solutions to some of these issues. And you might not get everything you want first time around, but
or the third,
or the first or the third, right?
Yeah.
But as long as you can develop those relationships, and that's really what it's all about. I mean, like getting legislation passed is all about relationships. So if you can know the right people, get their buy-in, and start building those relationships, and honestly, like, it sounds crass, but like check your ego a little bit and like make sure that the focus and the goal remains, you know, wanting to help survivors and not like wanting to get a perfect bill passed, then we can make progress. It might take a couple of years, but I always have to remind myself, like, we are changing systems and we're changing culture and like just how we view this issue, and that takes time. So it's like both a marathon and a sprint at the same time.
We sprint for a couple of events.
Yeah,
while we're doing the marathon to get us to the ultimate goal.
Exactly.
And by the way, I got some encouraging news. Michelle Henry, who was our state attorney general, she was appointed she had requested some additional money for the Attorney General's office anti-trafficking. And she looked to bring that investigation out of the organized crime unit.
Yeah.
Because that's where it had been housed, and she said it's just overwhelming. We got her some additional money last year. She started doing that. The new Attorney General, he started asking prosecutors and law enforcement around the state, and he was elected in January, or started in January. He said when it became very apparent that there was a need for more, and then he started saying, well, if I double it, what would that take care of it? He said, I got laughed at because my law enforcement around the state is becoming more and more aware, and it's the education portion of that you guys are so heavily involved with. But it's waking law enforcement up. The number of law enforcement agencies we had up in Bradford and McKean County here recently is a testimony to that. Law enforcement's becoming very aware of it. The prosecutors are, and we're gonna look at doubling through the budget here this year. They've got $1 million for just that, and we're gonna see if we can get it up to $2 million for them. And then the thing about it is, the more we find and the more we bring this out into the public through the prosecutorial process, they grabs the headlines. I think the people in the Commonwealth are going to become more and more aware of it and become more and more supportive of all of these lines of efforts.
Yeah. And honestly, you raised such a good point. Lawmakers need to hear from their constituents. Like, lawmakers need to hear from their constituents to tell them that this is an issue and it's an issue that they care about. And if you're a constituent and you really care deeply about this issue, but you don't know where to start, reach out to us at Shared Hope. We have a whole Ambassadors of Hope program that, we can, train you on how to train other people, and even like how to talk to lawmakers about this issue. So, just really wanted to highlight the importance of grassroots advocacy and encourage folks who are, I guess, intimidated to get involved in the policy side of things, that it's never as scary as you think it is. And
Right.
We're here to guide you if that's something that you are interested in doing.
Well, Megan does a great job up here, but many hands make light work.
Absolutely.
So if you're listening to this and you are interested in getting involved, please reach out to Shared Hope. They've got a tremendous program. They've got a good footprint here, and the working relationship that you folks have with all the different the people who are being effective at what they're doing here in the Commonwealth. I definitely, you can point people in the right direction, make sure that they're getting with an organization that has that's being effectual for all of these people.
Absolutely.
So you want to touch a little bit, we're coming close to the time here. You want to share how people get a hold of your organization? And I want to make a plug too. Go on to the website, sharedhope.org, and take a look at all the educational materials. Take a look at some of the videos. If you want to see how serious this is, and if you want to get an understanding of what people who have come out of the life and become survivors rather than victims, what they've experienced, you are getting so many new people who are coming out and coming out of the life, who've maybe even been out of the life for years, and they've got some very compelling stories. And I think those stories will motivate some people to actually become involved, because we could use the help. But go ahead.
I guess I would just, of course, plug our website, so sharedhope.org. look around, definitely check out the Invading the Darkness podcast that we have. That was what Senator Dush was talking about with the videos of the survivors. Check out our JUST conference. So we have an annual conference every year. It's called the JUST conference. It stands for Juvenile Sex Trafficking. We had our inaugural conference in 2014, I believe. So we are 11 years in, and this year it will be taking place from October 14th through the 16th in Orlando, Florida. We're going to be at a very fun resort this year, and they have shuttle to Disney World too. So if you want to make it a family affair, you're welcome to. Obviously anyone who's interested in learning more about our Ambassadors of Hope or just talking more about kind of the policy work that we are doing are free to reach out to me. Senator Dush, I'm not sure if you can provide my direct email to listeners somewhere in like a description.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that would be great. Or you can always email our kind of just basic policy email inbox, which will be policy@sharedhope.org.
All right. Well, we'll be happy to share those links in the description. Is there any other thing you'd like to leave us with before we sign off?
I don't believe so. I think we covered just about everything.
All right, we'll edit that part out, but Sydney, I can't express how grateful I am to have been able to partner with you, and I'm looking forward to continuing that partnership. We have a long way to go in Pennsylvania. We've got a long way to go in the country to help restore these young men, women, people who have come out of the life even years ago. But it's a fight worth fighting, and I'm truly grateful to you, and please pass on my appreciation and thanks to Linda and the rest of the team. And I'll plug Megan Ingram here in Pennsylvania as well. You guys have been fantastic to work with.
Well, thank you. You and your team have also been wonderful to work with, and I appreciate all of the time and energy you've devoted to this issue. So,
well, thank you. And this is Chris Dush. We're signing off from the Mission Report, and thank you, and God bless to all of you.